It happened in front of everyone at my wedding, not behind closed doors, not in a quiet argument, but into a microphone held confidently by the man who was supposed to protect me. My father. He laughed first, like it was a joke, like the moment belonged to him, and then he lifted the old yellowed passbook my grandfather had slipped into my hand just minutes earlier, and said, "Trash belongs with trash," before dropping it straight into a bucket of melting ice and champagne. People laughed because they always did when he spoke. People laughed because he made cruelty sound like confidence. And I stood there frozen as my wedding dress brushed against the floor, while the pages of my grandfather's life sank beneath bubbles and clinking glasses. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I reached into that freezing bucket with bare hands, ruined my dress, saved those soggy pages, and walked out without looking back, because I had learned a long time ago that begging never stopped men like him. While I drove away, I thought about every time I had been invisible growing up in that house where my brother was praised for breathing, and I was praised only when I endured silence, pain, obedience. I remembered being 12 years old on my knees, scrubbing hardwood floors, while my father watched with a glass of scotch, amused by how quietly I suffered, while my brother played video games, feet resting on the table I had just polished. I remembered how my grandfather tried to help me up once, and how my father's voice turned cold, telling him to stay out of it, or he would be sent away somewhere no one would ever visit. That night at my wedding was not new cruelty. It was simply the first time he performed it for an audience. 3 days later, I stood inside a bank holding the passbook in a plastic bag, the pages stained and crinkled, and I felt smaller than everyone around me, wearing a coat bought from a thrift store, trying not to take up space. When I asked the teller to check the balance, she typed casually, expecting nothing, and then she stopped breathing. Her face changed, her hands trembled, and she whispered, "Mom, please wait here, do not leave." I sat alone for a moment, staring at the floor, realizing something was wrong in a way I had never experienced before. When the manager arrived, followed by a man in a tailored suit, they didn't look at me like I was nothing. They looked at me like I was overdue. They led me into a private room, smelling of old paper and dust, and when the vault door closed behind us, my heart started pounding, because whatever was inside that ruined passbook was powerful enough that my father had thrown it away without even opening it. And for the first time in my life, I understood that maybe I was never weak. Maybe I had just been standing next to someone terrified of what I might become. The director opened the file slowly, like he was handling something fragile and ancient, and when he spoke, his voice wasn't dramatic. It was careful, respectful, the kind of tone people use around power they don't fully understand. He told me my grandfather hadn't opened a normal savings account. He had created a trust decades ago, quietly, patiently, while everyone else underestimated him just like they underestimated me. He invested early before the world believed in anything new. He invested in companies people laughed at, and instead of touching the money, he let it grow untouched for 40 years, never telling my father, never telling anyone, because he knew exactly who they were. When the director turned the paper toward me, the number didn't make sense at first. My brain rejected it like a lie. $12,400,000 sitting there black and permanent. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I felt hollow because suddenly every memory replayed itself. My father calling my grandfather useless, my brother mocking his thriftiness, my wedding humiliation replaying in my head like a cruel echo. My father hadn't just thrown away a passbook, he had thrown away $12 million, because arrogance makes people blind. I asked the only question that mattered, was anyone else listed on the account? And when the answer was no, just you, something inside me shifted permanently. That money wasn't freedom yet. It was something sharper. It was leverage. That night I went home to the small apartment I shared with my husband Luke, a man who didn't raise his voice, who didn't need an audience to feel important. Luke listened without interrupting as I told him everything, the wedding, the bank, the number, and when I finished he didn't ask what I wanted to buy. He asked one question: do you want revenge or do you want protection? Before I could answer, he opened his laptop and showed me something I had never seen before. My father's empire, stripped, naked numbers, exposed lies stacked on lies, shell accounts, empty trusts, fake liquidity. My father wasn't rich, he was drowning. The mansion was already in foreclosure, the business was bleeding money. The IRS was circling, and suddenly the humiliation at my wedding made sense because cruel men panic when they feel control slipping. Then my phone rang and his name lit up the screen like a warning. He didn't apologize, he didn't acknowledge what he did. He spoke like nothing had happened and told me he wanted to help me sell my grandfather's cottage for my own good, because I was too naive to handle property. When I told him no, his voice changed instantly, threatening legal action, accusing me of manipulation, calling me ungrateful, promising to drag me through court until I had nothing left. I ended the call calmly, but my hand shook because that was when I realized he wasn't trying to save me. He was hunting for money, and without knowing it, he had just shown me exactly how desperate he was. After that call, I didn't sleep because fear works differently when you finally understand the threat, and I replayed every word he said, realizing how carefully he chose them, how calm he sounded when he promised to destroy me, and how familiar that tone was. Growing up, he never shouted when he wanted control. He whispered because fear grows better in quiet spaces, and I remembered being a child, learning that silence kept me safe, while obedience kept the peace. Luke sat beside me through the night, pulling records, filing timelines, tracing money movements, and what he found was worse than debt. My father had been lying for decades, shifting the same small amount of cash between accounts, pretending it was wealth, convincing everyone he was untouchable. By morning it was clear he wasn't calling to protect me. He was calling because he needed something fast, something liquid, something he could sell or hide before the audits caught up to him. That was when Luke said the most dangerous sentence of all desperate men: make mistakes. I waited a full day before calling my father back because silence is pressure, and when he answered, I let my voice shake. I let my fear leak through the phone because he trusted weakness more than honesty. I told him about the passbook, about the number, about how the bank was asking questions, about taxes and audits, and how scared I was that the government would take everything. The change in him was instant. His anger softened into confidence, his threats turned into reassurance, and he spoke to me like a savior, explaining that he could protect me, shelter the money, hide it inside the family trust where no one would ever question it. He told me not to speak to lawyers, not to sign anything, not to think, just to bring everything to him, because fathers know best. I agreed because he needed to believe he still owned me. When he suggested signing everything at a charity gala, surrounded by important people, I knew he wanted witnesses not to protect me, but to legitimize himself. He wanted applause. He wanted recognition. He wanted to announce my grandfather's legacy as his own genius, and that arrogance blinded him completely. Luke and I didn't hire lawyers to fight him. We hired experts to document him. We prepared papers that looked familiar, felt safe, carried the right language and formatting, but buried inside them was something fatal. My father thought he was trapping a scared daughter. He didn't realize he was volunteering to confess. And the most powerful part was he never questioned it, because he never believed I was capable of anything except obedience. The night of the gala arrived, dressed in crystal chandeliers and borrowed confidence, and I walked into that ballroom knowing I was about to end something that had controlled me my entire life. I wasn't wearing the quiet beige clothes my father preferred I wore, red structured, deliberate, visible, for the first time, in a way that made people look twice and not look away. The room was full of people who believed my father was powerful: senators, donors, business leaders, all laughing comfortably, unaware that the man they admired was already falling. I saw my brother, first loud drunk, already performing the role he had been handed since birth, confident without substance, protected without merit, and I felt nothing for him. Not anger, not pity, just distance. My father stood near the stage, glowing with pride, the kind of pride that only comes from believing you have won. And when he saw me approach, his smile didn't fade, but his eyes narrowed because he needed to make sure I was still under control. He pulled me aside, hissed that I was late, asked if I had everything, and I handed him the folder without hesitation, because hesitation would have made him suspicious. He opened it quickly, scanning for the signature line. Not the words, not the meaning, just the place where his name would turn fear into relief. I explained it calmly, told him it put the entire inheritance under the family trust, told him it made him sole authority, told him it would protect me and, by extension, protect him. He didn't read the title. He didn't read the clauses. He didn't question why the dates stretched backward, linking him to decades of financial decisions. He signed because men like him believe documents exist to serve them. He handed the folder back to me dismissively, already turning toward the stage, because his mind was on applause, not consequences. "Go sit in the back," he said. "I have an announcement to make." I didn't sit. I stepped aside, photographed the signature page, and sent it exactly where Luke told me to send it. As my father climbed the stage and took the microphone, I felt something unfamiliar calm. He spoke proudly, about legacy, about family values, about expanding the foundation with $12 million he didn't own, confessing publicly while believing he was winning. The screen behind him flickered once and then changed. The foundation logo disappeared, replaced by a federal seal, and words no one in that room had ever expected to see. "Federal asset seizure in progress." The applause died mid-breath. My father turned confused, not afraid, because entitlement delays understanding, and that delay was everything. The doors opened. Agents moved forward, and for the first time in my life, the man who had controlled every room lost control of his own. The agents didn't rush him. They didn't need to, because power evaporates the moment witnesses stop believing in it. And my father stood there, gripping the microphone, asking if they knew who he was, as if his name alone could still bend reality. They told him exactly who he was, the sole trustee who had just signed responsibility for decades of hidden accounts, shell companies, and unpaid taxes. And the room watched as his confidence collapsed into disbelief. He looked at me, then truly looked at me, not as furniture, not as background noise, but as a threat. And he shouted that I had tricked him, that I was ungrateful, that I was a liar. But no one listened, because lies only work when they come from a position of strength. Handcuffs closed around the same hands that had dropped my grandfather's passbook into champagne, and cameras flashed, capturing the moment a myth turned into a man in a rented suit. I thought it was over then, that justice had finally been loud enough to end everything. It wasn't. In the private suite upstairs, the illusion of family shattered completely. My brother blocked the door, panicking, sweating, screaming that I had ruined everything, that I was supposed to stay quiet, that I was supposed to know my place. For the first time, I saw him without protection, without excuses, just fear and entitlement fighting for survival. He didn't attack out of anger, he acted out of desperation, the same desperation that had defined our household for years. And in that moment, it became clear that control had been the only language he ever learned. Security arrived quickly enough to stop what could have become something irreversible. And when my brother was taken away, sobbing, it wasn't pain. He was mourning. It was relevance. The gala resumed quietly, as if nothing had happened. Donors whispered, alliances shifted, and reputations recalculated in real time, because society forgives cruelty faster than it forgives weakness. I walked out alone, not chased, not followed, not invisible, just done. That night I sat in silence, processing the cost of everything, not the money, not the scandal, but the truth that family had never meant safety for me. It had meant endurance. And endurance has a breaking point. 3 weeks later, the noise was gone, and silence settled in a way that felt heavier than fear ever had, because fear at least tells you what to do, while silence asks you who you are without it. My father was denied bail, his assets frozen. his name stripped of meaning, and the house that once felt untouchable stood empty, like a shell that had already been abandoned from the inside. My brother took a plea deal quietly. No speeches, no defenses, no one left to protect him from consequences, and the family that once revolved around power learned very quickly how fast loyalty disappears when money does. I returned to my grandfather's cottage by the water, the one place that never asked me to earn my place, and I fixed what had been neglected: the roof, the garden, the quiet corners that reminded me of a man who had believed in patience instead of dominance. Luke asked me what I wanted to do with the trust, because $12 million changes how people look at you even when they pretend it does not. I told him nothing, because the money was never the victory, protection was. And for the first time in my life, I felt protected without having to disappear. I kept my job, I stayed a nurse, I still showed up to chaos every day, because helping people bleed honestly felt easier than surviving lies. Some nights I sit on the porch, listening to the ocean, and I think about that wedding moment, the champagne bucket, the laughter, the cruelty, dressed as confidence. And I understand now that my father did not lose because I was smarter or stronger. He lost because he never believed I could stop being afraid. The most brutal truth is this: he did not create me. He tried to erase me and failed. I don't forgive him not out of anger, but because forgiveness requires safety, and I don't need closure from people who only valued my silence. Family does not mean blood, it means who stands beside you when power shifts and the vault finally opens. And if there is a lesson here, it is not about revenge or money or justice. It is about what happens when the second choice stops waiting to be chosen. This is my judgment, and this is the judgment of the one who lived it. What happened here was not discipline, it was control, not leadership but entitlement, not family but ownership, disguised as tradition. A father who believes fear is respect does not raise children. He manufactures silence and calls it order. The most dangerous abuse is the kind that leaves no bruises, because it teaches victims to doubt their own pain while protecting the person causing it. And the hardest truth is, this: many families do not break because of evil. They break because everyone benefits from staying quiet. So here is the question I want you to answer, honestly, not for me, but for yourself. If you were in her place, would you have walked away quietly to keep the peace? Or would you have done the unthinkable and taken your power back, knowing it would destroy everything you were taught to protect? Tell me in the comments who was wrong here: the daughter for setting the trap, or the father for building a life that could only survive by crushing someone else. I read every response, and your answer might say more about your own story than you realize.